Imagine arriving in this world with no labels attached to you. No expectations, no rankings, no comparisons. You arrive curious, alert, sensitive to sound, movement, and emotion. Everything feels alive. Questions arise naturally, not because someone demands answers, but because wonder itself is irresistible. You touch things to understand them. You ask questions not to challenge authority, but because understanding feels like breathing. This is how the human mind begins its journey, open, fluid, and alive. Now imagine how quickly that openness is reshaped. Not through cruelty, but through structure. Not through violence, but through repetition. You are placed into environments where curiosity must follow schedules, where questions must fit predefined boxes, where silence is often safer than honesty. You are told this is education. You are told this is preparation for life. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, the rules change. You are no longer encouraged to explore reality. You are encouraged to adapt to systems. At first, the changes feel harmless. You learn when to sit, when to speak, when to wait. You learn that answers matter more than questions, that speed matters more than depth, that correctness matters more than understanding. You are praised when you repeat what is expected and corrected when you wander too far from the path. You are not told to stop thinking, only to think within boundaries. And because the boundaries are everywhere, they eventually become invisible. Over time, something subtle happens. You begin to associate approval with compliance. You learn that being right feels safer than being honest. You notice that certainty is rewarded while doubt is uncomfortable. Slowly, the mind adapts. It becomes efficient. It learns shortcuts. It learns how to give the expected response instead of the authentic one. This adaptation is not weakness. It is intelligence responding to pressure. But intelligence under pressure does not always grow wiser. Sometimes it simply grows quieter. As years pass, the original sense of curiosity does not disappear. It is not destroyed. It is redirected. Instead of asking what is true, the mind asks what is acceptable. Instead of asking what matters, it asks what will be rewarded. And because the system rarely asks who you are becoming, you learn to measure yourself by external standards. Grades become identity. Performance becomes worth. Comparison becomes normal. By the time formal education ends, many people feel prepared to function, but strangely disconnected from themselves. They know how to follow instructions, but not how to listen inwardly. They know how to solve assigned problems, but not how to question the assumptions behind them. They know how to stay busy, but not how to sit with uncertainty. This disconnection is often mislabeled as laziness, anxiety, or lack of motivation. But in many cases, it is something else entirely. It is the result of a mind trained to seek direction rather than meaning. Arthur Schopenhauer once observed that most institutions do not aim to cultivate thinkers, but to produce useful participants. He believed that genuine understanding cannot be mass-produced because it arises from direct engagement with life, not from second-hand explanations. True insight, in his view, is born in solitude, in suffering, in moments where the individual confronts reality without filters. Yet modern systems are designed to minimize exactly these experiences. Silence is filled. Discomfort is avoided. Reflection is rushed. This creates a paradox. We live in an age overflowing with information, yet starved of wisdom. Facts are abundant, but understanding feels shallow. Opinions are everywhere, but clarity is rare. People speak constantly, yet listen very little. The noise is relentless, and within that noise, thinking becomes exhausting. Not because thinking is inherently difficult, but because the environment discourages it. The modern world does not suppress thought by forbidding it. It suppresses thought by exhausting the mind. Endless notifications, endless content, endless urgency. There is always something to react to, something to comment on, something to consume. Stillness feels unnatural. Silence feels uncomfortable. And without stillness, reflection has no place to emerge. The human brain, overwhelmed by stimulation, begins to rely on shortcuts. It seeks familiar narratives, emotional signals, and group consensus to navigate complexity. This is not stupidity. It is survival. But when these shortcuts are constantly reinforced, they become habits. Over time, habits become identities. You no longer just believe certain things. You become the kind of person who believes them. And once belief merges with identity, questioning feels dangerous. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that societies often preserve themselves not by nurturing strength, but by rewarding obedience. He believed that systems tend to favor predictability over vitality, conformity over creativity. From this perspective, education becomes less about awakening the individual and more about stabilizing the collective. Those who fit easily are praised. Those who question too deeply are corrected. Those who refuse to conform are labeled difficult, unrealistic, or disruptive. Yet history shows that progress has never come from perfect conformity. It has come from individuals willing to stand apart, to tolerate misunderstanding, to endure isolation in the pursuit of truth. These individuals are rarely celebrated in their time. They are inconvenient. They slow things down. They ask questions that expose uncomfortable contradictions. And for this reason, they often feel out of place in systems designed for efficiency. The cost of this misalignment is not always visible. It often appears later, quietly, in adulthood. It appears as chronic dissatisfaction, as burnout that no amount of rest seems to fix, as the feeling of living someone else's life. People follow prescribed paths, achieve expected milestones, and still feel empty. They assume something is wrong with them. They assume they failed to adapt properly. But what if the emptiness is not a flaw, but a signal? Carl Jung believed that when essential parts of the self are suppressed, they do not vanish. They retreat into the unconscious, where they continue to influence behavior in indirect ways. Creativity suppressed becomes restlessness. Sensitivity suppressed becomes anxiety. Independence suppressed becomes resentment. The shadow grows not because the individual is broken, but because the environment did not allow wholeness. Modern culture often pathologizes these symptoms without questioning their origin. Anxiety becomes a disorder. Burnout becomes a personal failure. Depression becomes a chemical imbalance. While these explanations can be useful, they are incomplete if they ignore the deeper context. A system that disconnects people from meaning cannot be healed solely through coping strategies. It requires understanding. True education was never meant to shape obedient workers. It was meant to cultivate human beings capable of understanding themselves and the world they inhabit. In ancient traditions, learning was inseparable from character formation. To learn was to become. Knowledge was not accumulated for utility alone, but integrated into life. Wisdom mattered more than speed. Depth mattered more than efficiency. Somewhere along the way, this vision was replaced. Productivity became the primary value. Success became measurable. Growth became standardized. And while these changes increased output, they often diminished purpose. The system became very good at answering the question of how to function, but very poor at addressing why to live. Nietzsche believed that suffering was not merely something to be avoided, but something to be transformed. Through struggle, he argued, individuals could develop strength, clarity, and authenticity. Yet modern systems are designed to minimize failure at all costs. Mistakes are punished. Uncertainty is discouraged. Discomfort is treated as a problem to be eliminated. In doing so, the very conditions that produce resilience are removed. This creates a fragile culture. A culture uncomfortable with ambiguity, intolerant of dissent, fearful of silence. A culture where people crave certainty, not because it is true, but because it feels safe. Where group agreement replaces independent thought. Where popularity becomes evidence. Where emotional reactions are mistaken for moral clarity. Social media amplifies this dynamic dramatically. Platforms reward speed, outrage, and simplicity. Nuance does not spread easily. Reflection does not trend. Doubt does not go viral. The result is a constant pressure to have an opinion, to take a side, to perform certainty. Thought becomes theater. Identity becomes brand. And the inner life grows quieter. In such an environment, the act of thinking deeply becomes a form of resistance. Not because it is rebellious, but because it refuses to be rushed. To think critically is to pause when others react, to question when others repeat, to listen when others shout. It requires humility, because it acknowledges the limits of one's knowledge. And it requires courage because it often leads away from comfort. Reclaiming your ability to think is not about rejecting learning. It is about reclaiming responsibility for your own understanding. It begins with solitude, not loneliness but intentional withdrawal from noise. Moments where your thoughts are not immediately interrupted or evaluated. Where questions can arise without pressure to resolve them instantly. Continues with honest questioning. Not the kind that seeks to win arguments, but the kind that seeks clarity. Why do I believe what I believe? Where did this assumption come from? Does this idea help me understand reality? Or does it simply protect my identity? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten certainty. But certainty is not the same as truth. As you begin this process, you may notice resistance. Internal resistance. A sense of unease. A fear of being wrong. A fear of standing alone. This is normal. The mind has been trained to associate belonging with safety. Questioning can feel like exile. But growth has always required some degree of separation. You cannot see clearly from within the crowd. Viktor Frankl discovered, through unimaginable suffering, that meaning is not given by circumstances. It is discovered through response. Even when external freedom is limited, inner freedom remains. This insight carries a profound implication. No system, no matter how pervasive, can fully determine who you become. But reclaiming that freedom requires awareness. It requires you to stop living on autopilot. This reclamation is not dramatic. It does not require abandoning society or rejecting all structure. It requires attentiveness, listening to what drains you and what energizes you, paying attention to moments when you feel alive and moments when you feel numb. These signals are not random. They are expressions of alignment or misalignment between your inner nature and your outer life. You are not only a thinking being. You are an emotional, embodied, intuitive being. Systems that treat humans as machines inevitably fail to address this complexity. When intuition is ignored, life becomes mechanical. When emotion is suppressed, it returns in distorted forms. When the body is neglected, the mind suffers. Reclaiming yourself means reintegrating these dimensions. Allowing yourself to feel without immediately labeling or fixing. Allowing yourself to move, to rest, to create without external validation. Allowing yourself to change your mind. This last point is especially important. A culture obsessed with consistency often punishes growth. But growth is, by nature, inconsistent. To evolve is to contradict your past self. One of the greatest lies taught implicitly is that falling behind is permanent. That if you do not follow the prescribed timeline, you have failed. This belief creates quiet despair. People rush into decisions not because they feel ready, but because they fear being left behind. Yet life does not unfold according to schedules. Meaning does not operate on deadlines. Depth cannot be rushed. Schopenhauer believed that freedom arises not from achievement, but from detachment. From seeing through illusions, including the illusion that authority grants value. Titles, grades, status, and recognition are not measures of worth. They are tools, sometimes useful, often misleading. When mistaken for identity, they become prisons. You were never meant to fit perfectly into systems designed for averages. You were meant to discover your own orientation toward life. This discovery does not come through obedience alone. It comes through experimentation, error, reflection, and sometimes failure. Not failure as condemnation, but failure as feedback. Education does not end when school ends. In many ways, it begins there. When external structures loosen, the responsibility shifts inward. Your life becomes the curriculum. Every relationship teaches you something about boundaries. Every challenge teaches you something about resilience. Every moment of silence teaches you something about yourself. The question is not whether you are intelligent enough, capable enough, or disciplined enough. The deeper question is whether you are awake enough to notice the patterns shaping you. Whether you are willing to examine the beliefs you inherited rather than merely defending them. Whether you are willing to trade comfort for clarity when necessary. To live thoughtfully in a thoughtless world is not easy. It requires patience in an age of speed, humility in an age of certainty, and depth in an age of distraction. But it also offers something rare, a sense of integrity. The feeling that your actions align with your understanding. The quiet confidence that comes from living deliberately rather than reactively. You may not change the world immediately by thinking differently, but you will change your relationship to it. You will become less predictable, less manipulable, less dependent on external approval. You will begin to recognize when fear is being used to control attention, when outrage is being used to distract from complexity, when simplicity is being used to hide truth. This awakening does not make you superior. It makes you responsible. Responsible for how you think, how you speak, how you influence others. Thinking critically is not about superiority. It is about care. Care for truth, for understanding, for the consequences of ideas. The world does not need more noise. It does not need more certainty shouted louder. It needs more people willing to pause, to reflect, to say, "I don't know," without shame, and to seek understanding without agenda. These people may never dominate headlines. They may never trend. But they shape the deeper currents of culture. If you feel out of place, if you feel resistant to shallow answers, if you feel uncomfortable with easy certainty, consider the possibility that nothing is wrong with you. Consider the possibility that your discomfort is a sign of awareness. A sign that some part of you remembers a different way of being. You were not born to be efficient alone. You were born to be aware, to experience, to understand, to create meaning from chaos. Systems can teach skills. They can transmit information, but they cannot replace the inner work of becoming human. That work begins the moment you stop asking how to fit in and start asking how to live truthfully. It continues every time you choose reflection over reaction, understanding over approval, depth over speed. And it never truly ends, because the most important education is not about preparing for a future role. It is about learning how to meet reality as it is, with clarity, courage, and humility. And that education belongs to you,